On May 5, 1945, one of the most unusual and spectacular battles in recent history took place. A mix of action and drama that could easily have come from an imaginative war movie you find on TV on a rainy Saturday. But what happened was not fiction, but pure reality. That day, soldiers of the regular German army, the Wehrmacht, formed a surprising alliance with American troops in an epic fight against the ruthless combat units of the Waffen-SS. This battle, as unusual as it was dramatic, was the only event in World War II where Americans and Germans fought side by side. This unexpected alliance underlines the complexity and chaos that was experienced in those last months of the conflict. Join us in this video to go through the battle for Itter Castle, a mind-blowing and astonishing story that shows how even our most bitter enemy can become a forced but valuable ally. Let's begin.
By May 1945, Hitler had shot himself in the bunker. The Nazi regime had collapsed. But here, in the small Austrian village of Itter, it would see one final battle, and it was one of the strangest of World War II. Throughout its history, Itter Castle has had some interesting guests. But during World War II, it was home to a group of very senior French residents. So with the Anschluss with Austria in the 1930s, and then with the start of the Second World War on the 1st of September 1939, it wouldn't be long before Castle Itter was drawn into the chaos.
Located in the Austrian Alps, Itter Castle has existed as a fortification since the 13th century. It was rebuilt in 1532 and renovated in 1878. At the beginning of the 20th century, it was converted into a hotel, and in the 1920s it acquired the status of a luxury hotel. However, with the outbreak of the Second World War, which took place between 1939 and 1945, it was expropriated by the SS, the paramilitary organization under the command of the Führer.
Many young men who privately despised the Nazis ended up in their ranks, where they learned of the military strategies being employed by Wehrmacht commanders up close. In a parallel effort, a branch of the Nazis' Waffen-SS, the party's branded police force, had been operating in secret in Austria since 1934. Their primary objective was to identify and flag any Austrians who were anticipated to resist occupation or otherwise present a threat. This effort paved the way for the oncoming Anschluss. Dissidents, nationalists, leftists, and others were rounded up.
In 1940, Austria was annexed by the Third Reich under Adolf Hitler's orders. This process became known as Anschluss. As a result, Itter Castle was leased to the Nazi government. In 1943, it was brought under the administrative control of Dachau, a gloomy concentration camp that held over 200,000 prisoners, including many Jews, political opponents, prisoners of war, homosexuals, the disabled, and other groups persecuted by the Nazi regime. Many did not live to tell the tale. Dachau was located some 145 kilometers away from the castle, so it became an annexed detention center where the SS held a particular kind of inmate.
The project was spearheaded by Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, who designated SS Second Lieutenant Petz to remain on site and oversee construction. Petz arrived at the castle on February 8, 1943, with 27 prisoners, both from Dachau and the Flossenburg camps, to act as his labor force. Over the following months, the castle was gutted and transformed into a prison camp. Its guest rooms converted into cells and offices for SS brass. Its various entrances and exits thoroughly escape-proof.
The castle was guarded by the ruthless SS Totenkopfverbände, known as the Death's Head units. These forces were under the command of the sadistic SS captain Sebastian Wimmer, who had previously served at the dreaded Majdanek concentration camp. His mission was to hold French prisoners as hostages and potential bargaining tools, with orders to execute them as soon as he received the order. Paradoxically, however, the prisoners at Itter spent their likely final days in the hotel's luxurious rooms. The staff at the Dachau camp were at their beck and call, catering to their every need. They enjoyed plentiful quality food and were free to roam the grounds of the compound, as if they were in a luxury resort run by the Nazis. Curious hosts, aren't they? On June 6, 1944, Allied troops landed in Normandy on what was popularly called D-Day and began to advance rapidly across European territory. As the US-led forces approached Austria, they began to receive rumors about an Alpine refuge where the most radical Nazis awaited a final showdown. The Allies had news of prominent French prisoners whose fate hung in the balance. But who were these people?
These high-profile prisoners included tennis star Jean Barota, 2 former prime ministers, 3 former commanders-in-chief, and Marie-Agnes Caillot, the sister of French resistance leader Charles de Gaulle. The prisoners themselves represented several different interests and political ideologies. They tended to separate into 3 groups for meals to keep from fighting. As far as quality of life, the prisoners held at Itter Castle had it much better than other Nazi-controlled prisons and camps.
As we see, the last prisoners of Itter Castle were mostly elderly Frenchmen who had held high government positions before their fall from grace with the Third Reich. Among them were 2 former French prime ministers, Édouard Daladier, who was arrested in his African exile, and Paul Reynaud, who had consistently resisted Germany. Also present were former generals Maxime Weygand, captured while trying to escape the country in 1942, and Maurice Gamelin, who failed to stop the German advance in the spring of 1940. Other notable prisoners included Léon Jouhaux, a trade unionist who was opposed to the Vichy government, Jean-Robert Borotra, a tennis champion who had been Minister of Sport under Vichy before being arrested, François de Larocque, a former fascist orator arrested after breaking with French collaborationists, and Michel Clemenceau, son of the late Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau, who had recently taken on the Nazi Allied regime. In addition, several of the women who were imprisoned did so alongside their husbands or partners. By 1945, Germany was rapidly losing ground in the war. On April 30th of that year, Adolf Hitler committed suicide. The event took place in his bunker in Berlin, with Germany's defeat in the air. The commander of the Dachau concentration camp took refuge in Itter Castle, while American troops liberated the camp, and on May 2nd, he imitated the Führer to his last act, and also took his own life. 2 days later, the commander of Itter Castle and his guards also deserted, leaving the prisoners to their fate. While they were happy about their new freedom, the inmates were unable to leave the castle due to the nearby presence of hostile German forces.
They were now left alone. There were still a lot of German forces loyal to the old regime, still roaming the hills and the woods around this area. All they could do at this point was hope for the Americans to get to their location and free them as quickly as possible. Now, before Wimmer and his men abandoned the castle, on the 3rd of May, after having spoken with the French prisoners, the handyman here, known as Kukovic, and he was a Croat who had been working with the Yugoslav resistance but had been captured and ended up here and was working as a janitor at the castle. Now, he had a difficult relationship with SS Hauptsturmführer Wimmer, but one thing that Wimmer did allow was for him to run local errands.
The prisoners had sent Zvonimir Chuchkovic, their Yugoslav caretaker, to seek help from the advancing American troops. Chuchkovic managed to contact Allied forces in Innsbruck, a city in western Austria, but the castle was outside the jurisdiction of that military division. Suddenly, the prisoners found themselves trapped in a nightmare. The forest surrounding the castle had become a chaotic battlefield. The scene was a whirlwind of terror and confusion. Ruthless Gestapo agents, fanatical combat-ready Waffen-SS units, skilled Gebirgsjäger mountain soldiers, and Wehrmacht troops mixed with Hitler Youth and Volkssturm civilian militias surrounded the historic building.
Morale among the castle's guard staff had eroded. Following both Eduard Weiter's mysterious death the night prior and Kukovic's failure to return from his errand, Wimmer gave up and fled his command post, fearing for his own life. The SS guards that remained there soon followed suit, leading the prisoners to take control of the castle, arming themselves with makeshift weapons found throughout the castle grounds. They did not dare leave the castle, however, because they weren't sure of the situation in the surrounding area, or how much of Tyrol was still actively under Nazi control. Instead, they hung a French flag from the castle's exterior to signal to Allied air forces who was inside and avoid attacks.
But that was not all. In the chaos were also members of the Austrian anti-Nazi resistance, armed to the teeth by the British OSS, along with non-combatant civilians desperate to surrender. To add to the horror, a pair of imposing Tiger tanks were immobilized in the forest. This explosive mix of forces and the agonizing uncertainty about how long a war that had already devastated the world for more than 6 years would last made the situation a real ticking bomb. How would the prisoners in the castle survive this anarchy that surrounded them?
So the great thing about Castle Itter is, from a strategic point of view, for the defenders, it was in an ideal place. Surrounded on 3 sides by high walls and very steep banks, the only way in was through this road. Now this gave the defenders an ideal opportunity to fortify the castle and ensure that if they could just hold out long enough, the American forces would eventually arrive. So Major Josef Sepp Gangl, he would become one of the heroes of the battle for Itter.
The French sent 2 brave men on a daring bicycle mission to seek help. One of them, a cook named Andreas Krobot, managed to contact the Austrian resistance in the town of Wrgl. Luckily for him, the Nazi Wehrmacht forces had recently abandoned the town. There, Krobot met German Major Josef Sepp Gangl, a highly decorated officer who had defied orders to rejoin the SS and joined the Austrian resistance, quickly becoming its leader. But Gangl knew he couldn't protect the prisoners. He had only 20 loyal soldiers under his command, so he was forced to seek help from the Allied forces. Yes, you heard right. A reputable Nazi officer wanting to collaborate with the Americans. With a large white flag in hand, Gangl approached the nearest American unit, the 12th Armored Division's 23rd Tank Battalion, under the command of Captain Jack Lee. This man, a former football player and heavy drinker, was moved by the desperate situation and offered to lead a daring rescue mission. He knew that every minute counted in the frantic endgame of this war.
Gangl met with 27-year-old Captain Lee, commander of the 23rd Tank Battalion, 12th Armored Division. Lee and his troops had hoped that taking Kufstein would be their last battle, as they knew the war was winding down, and they planned to wait there until they could be relieved by the 36th Infantry Division. When Gangl sat down with Captain Lee and explained the situation at the castle, Lee quickly volunteered to spearhead a rescue mission, quickly radioing to receive permission from his commanders. A rescue mission. Lee knew that he didn't have enough vehicles to safely escort all of the prisoners out of the castle and carry them back to Kufstein.
Lee and his new crew managed to recruit 5 tanks on their way to the castle, but they faced an unforeseen obstacle. A bridge in such poor condition forced them to send reinforcements back. Despite this, they pushed forward with fierce determination towards Itter. They were 14 American soldiers, Major Gangl plus a driver, and a truck loaded with 10 former German gunners. Just 4 miles from the castle, they encountered SS troops attempting to set up a roadblock and defeated them in a fierce confrontation, clearing the way to their crucial mission.
So Captain Jack Lee didn't want to leave any tanks behind here in Wrgl. He knew that the situation at Itter would be so desperate that he needed all the help he could get. But the Austrian resistance in the area were adamant. It was at this point that Major Josef Sepp Gangl, he stepped up and suggested to Lee that if Lee left some of his tanks behind, that he would supplement the relief force with some of his own loyal Wehrmacht troops. Lee accepted, and this would become one of the unique circumstances in World War II, where Wehrmacht troops would work side by side in a joint operation with the United States Army.
Upon arrival, Captain Lee met with the castle's new leader, former Waffen-SS Captain Kurt Siegfried Schrader. A veteran of the fierce battles of Leningrad, Caen, and the Remagen Bridge, Schrader had been taken prisoner opposing the Third Reich, as had his comrade Sepp Gangl. Despite their diverse backgrounds and conflicting pasts, Schrader, Lee, and Gangl formed an unlikely team, an alliance of unlikely warriors that defied logic.
A small company encountered a party of roaming SS troops attempting to set up a barrier to block the road to the castle. A firefight ensued, and the company led by Lee and Gangl quickly persevered. Back behind castle walls, the lingering prisoners had also enlisted help from strange bedfellows. They had asked Kurt Siegfried Schrader, an SS officer stationed at the prison, whom they had come to know and trust as a defector from the Nazi cause, to head the castle's meager defense forces, sensing that an SS attack was coming. Lee and Gangl arrived at the castle and assessed the situation.
Despite Lee's grateful arrival, the prisoners could not help but feel somewhat disappointed by the small size of the relief unit. Nevertheless, everyone dug into their defensive positions around the castle, while Lee's tank, named Besotten Jenny, stood firm at the main entrance, ready to face the impending siege. In order not to mistake their own for the enemy, The Germans wore a piece of black cloth on their left arm. The Americans and Germans planned a defense of the medieval castle so that it could withstand the attack of the Nazis. The battle was about to begin.
Because Captain Lee had had to leave a lot of tanks to defend Virgil, the two on the main road and then Boschbuster at the main bridge to secure those crossing points, he only had one piece of armour, and that was his own tank, Besot and Jenny. When it arrived and they were setting up their defences, he would park it in the gateway to the castle to prevent any Germans physically moving into the castle and act as a massive roadblock. So as the defenders prepared here at Castle Itter, the friendly Wehrmacht forces would tie a dark piece of cloth around their arm to denote that they were friendly and that they were on the side of the Allies, and they would fight shoulder to shoulder with the Americans here.
Before the main assault began, Gangl managed to contact the Austrian resistance and received just 3 additional reinforcements: 2 German soldiers and an Austrian teenager. In the meantime, Lee's tank provided the necessary support to hold out. The expected Waffen-SS siege broke out on the morning of May 5, 1945. During the previous night, they were attacked by a reconnaissance force sent to assess the castle's defenses and look for weak points.
The SS troops arrived, but did not immediately launch any sort of full-scale attack. Instead, they circled the castle's perimeter, seemingly probing for a weak spot. The Germans who had sided with the prisoners inside risked being killed for treason if they were defeated by the SS, and one of the resistance Germans indeed fled in a panic from within the castle over its walls and into the surrounding forest, where the SS had set up several strongpoints. This incident caused Lee to worry about the reliability of the remaining German soldiers, but Gangl convinced him to let them keep their weapons.
In the early morning, between 100 and 150 Waffen-SS soldiers launched a fierce offensive. Some prisoners joined the defense, using light weapons abandoned by their former guards. Despite Lee's orders for the French prisoners to stay under cover, they decided to stay outside and fight side by side with the American and Wehrmacht soldiers.
At around 8:30 AM, Captain Lee was at the top of the keep, observing the area around the castle through his binoculars. It was at this moment he saw a very worrying sight. Troops from the Waffen-SS were swarming around the area. From what Lee, Gangl and Schrader could see from the top of the keep, the castle was being surrounded by a large force of 100 to 150 troops from the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division. For the Waffen-SS troops, their orders were simple: kill everybody inside. So as the fighting continued, former French prisoners couldn't stand idly by and just watch the Allied troops defend them.
The SS siege of the castle began with a hail of MG-42 machine gun fire from the surrounding woods. The Sherman guns, strategically positioned to protect the fortress entrance, responded with heavy fire, attempting to repel the offensive from the first moment. The Waffen-SS attacking forces were equipped with a deadly 88mm cannon, a fearsome tank destroyer, as well as a 75mm cannon and a 20mm cannon, the dreaded meat grinder made famous in the Battle of Ramelle. During the crucial hours of the siege, Lee's Sherman was reduced to rubble by a shell, although his crew managed to survive. For hours, the castle was shaken by intense machine gun fire. Clouds of dust and smoke enveloped the battlefield, creating a visual and oral chaos that made it difficult to distinguish friend from foe amid the desperate fighting. The battle for Itter Castle was at its height. The SS, determined to retake the fortress, launched waves of merciless attacks. Machine guns roared and the castle walls shook under the impact of the cannon fire. When Joseph Gangl saw that French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud was in danger, he did not hesitate for a second. The German ran through the crossfire, dodging bullets and explosions, determined to save the man. But just as he was pushing him to safety, a deadly shot from the Waffen-SS found its mark. Gangl fell to the ground. Life was slipping away from him, but he could leave this world knowing that he had given everything for the freedom of the Allied forces. Meanwhile, an additional force from the American 142nd Infantry was heading towards the castle, accompanied by 2 journalists determined to cover the story. At Itter, the most unlikely messenger was sent to contact the approaching reinforcements, explain the situation, and guide them inside. This was Frenchman Jean-Robert Bourassa, a 4-time Grand Slam tennis champion and a famous politician. For obvious reasons, Bourassa turned out to be the fittest and most capable prisoner for this mission. Bourassa had also attempted to escape on several occasions, so he knew the terrain outside the castle walls. After a daring maneuver that led him to break through the SS lines, Bourassa encountered someone he would never have expected: French-Canadian war correspondent René Lévesque, later to become Premier of Quebec. Lévesque, who was part of the relief forces, recognized him instantly. The former tennis player managed to escape unharmed, requested a uniform from the Americans, and joined the rescue force as it advanced toward the castle.
Bourassa vaulted the castle walls and ran full steam through an obstacle course of SS footholds throughout the forest to reach the 142nd and give them a full debrief of the situation up at the castle. He then requested an American Army uniform and joined the marching troops back up through the forest toward the castle. The long-awaited relief force arrived at the castle at 4 in the afternoon, and with their help, the remaining SS forces were quickly extinguished.
At around 1600, just when it seemed that the defenders' ammunition was about to run out, another miracle occurred. The rescue column, equipped with tanks, half-tracks, jeeps, and troops, finally reached the castle. The first German soldier to spot the Shermans shouted in alarm to his American comrades, "Panzer!" Faced with the imminent arrival of a large enemy force, the Waffen-SS forces melted away into the woods, leaving the defenders relieved and miraculously safe. The Allies pursued the Nazis and managed to capture 100 of their men. This engagement became the only documented case in which Americans and Germans fought together on the same side. The battle took place just 2 days before Germany's unconditional surrender. Captain Lee was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his bravery. Major Gangl was named a national hero of Austria for his courage as part of the anti-Nazi resistance. He was buried in the nearby town of Wörgl, where a street is now named after him. Wimmer, the SS commander who had escaped from the castle, avoided trial at the Nuremberg tribunals, but committed suicide in 1952. Waffen-SS Captain Kurt Siegfried Schroeder was released, and in 1953 accepted a position in the Interior Ministry of the State of Westphalia. Had the SS managed to enter the castle and murder the prominent French prisoners, perhaps the history of post-war France would have taken a radically different course. As we saw, the prisoners were important figures, and some of them would become key players in formulating the policies that brought France into the 21st century. If they had died in the castle, who knows what would have happened to France and contemporary Europe. This is how another military history video ends. Thank you for following us to the end. If you are interested in learning about other incredible World War II battles, we invite you to subscribe to the channel. See you next time.